on board soon. Sponsors, Dr. Year of Learning, Dr. Paul Koningsberg in memory of his brother, Dr. Sam Koningsberg, Shimon Reuven ben Labish, and Ed Goldberg's cousin Nisan Hara, Nisan ben Fardosa. Paula and Bob Bromberg in memory of their dear friend Julian Smith, Yehuda ben Yisrael. Malka Mann, Alaa Shalom, in memory of her family murdered in the Holocaust. Harav Tzvi Hirsch ben Shlomo Yaakov, Sarah bat Ephraim, Israel David ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Ephraim ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Adia bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Miriam bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Pesel bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shalom ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shlomo Yaakov ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shmuel ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch. The many friends of Dr. Marvin Blush, Moshe Shalom ben Yitzchak Halevi, friends of Toby Paris, Sarah Tova bat Yisrael Dov, friends of Malka Levi, Malka bat Yosef, friends of Avi Gitler, Avram Meir ben Shimon, Cheryl Scher, her children and grandchildren, in memory of her uncle, founding member of BRS, Dr. Israel Brook, Yisrael ben Arav Akiva, Marcia Federbush and family, in memory of her husband, Dr. Uriel Paul Federbush, Uriel Pinchas ben Harav Shimon, friends of Joe Wolf, in memory of Yosef ben Chaim, Sharon and Fred Lisker, their family and many friends, in memory of her dear mom, Harriet Friedman, Edelbas Yaakov. Have a Month of Learning by Jill and Perry Meltzer, in memory of her father, Yaakov ben Yosef, by B. Pizer, in memory of her mother and her stepfather, Rezel bat Shammai, Avram Michal ben Shmuel Halevi, Josh and Carol Sanborn, in memory of his mother, Chiena bat Aryeh Leib, and his father, Shmuel Aryeh ben Baruch, Mel and Haran Haller, in memory of his mother, Fega bas Yaakov, Andrea and David Dolney, in memory of her mother, Edel Sina bat Shimshon. We have a Week of Learning by Mark and Catherine Linder, in memory of his nephew, Eretz Paul ben Surlas. And that is it for today, actually. May the Hashem is having Aliyah, Krank Rafia, Velti Yeshir Hashem Lataliah, Chol B'nai Yisrael, Good Gaben Shtiyar.
Amen.
All right. So we left off yesterday looking at this machloket that we saw. If I can put it back up on the screen again. Okay. Just very quickly. There we go. Okay. At this machloket again, that went over to the top of Kaf Gimel Amud Aleph. And we saw that there were certain individuals who did hold certain commonalities. Rav, Shmuel, and Rava all began with wine. Over here, Mar, son of Rabbana, Rabbi Yoshua, and Rabbi Yoshua ben Chananya all claim the candle had to go first. Okay. Here, Levi and the rabbi said Kiddush had to go first. So we can see, in essence, to begin to understand what the machloket is that situation is what takes precedence, in a sense. Does the Shabbat take precedence? And therefore, we must do what's appropriate for the exiting of Shabbat? Or do we say, on the other hand, that the coming in of the Yom Tov takes precedence, and that marking the beginning of the Yom Tov, either through Kiddush, okay, or either through having the blessing over the wine, okay, takes precedence. So that was the first item that we could point out as the difference in the variety of positions. because if you say that Shabbat takes precedence, then clearly we can see why some would say Havdalah would be second, okay, or the candle or Havdalah, right? If you say that that's not the case, okay, notice that we had a number that said Havdalah was at the end, and that here too, Havdalah being at the end, and Kiddush being at the end. So that seems to be the basis of the criteria for this machloket, which should be marked first, the end of the Shabbat or the beginning of the start of the Yom Tov. Okay? So I wanted to point that out again because I wanted us to, I shouldn't have done that. Okay, good. All right, so as we go into Kaf Gimel Amud Aleph, okay, we're going to see an attempt by the Gemara to come up with a conclusion, okay? So if we're going to start, we gave all of the examples of the various positions. And that was the top 7 lines of Kaf Gimel Amud Aleph. And so we're going to start about 8 lines down where it says Amar Rabbi Chanina. Okay? And so Rabbi Chanina is going to give us a mashal, okay, a parable, to try to understand which should take, as in my words, which takes precedence, whether the Shabbat and its exit or the entrance of the Yom Tov. Okay? Amar Rabbi Chanina, he says, Mashal the Rabbi Yoshua ben Chananya. Okay? And he's sharing with them the mashal, the parable of Rabbi Yoshua ben Chananya. Lamelech sheyotze va'aparchus nichnas. That the king is leaving and the governor is coming in. Melavin et hamelech va'achar kach yotzeim likrat ha'aparchus. That one escorts the king going out. In other words, that should have the greater power. And afterwards, then we bring in and welcome the governor. Okay? So the governor surely would be of less significance than the king. Mai have'ala. So the Gemara asks, if that's the case, what's the end result? What did we decide about this? Abaye Amar, says Abaye, Yayin Kiddush Zman Ner Havdalah. Okay? So here we're really back to referring to the beginning of the holiday, first day of the Yom Tov, starting on Motzei Shabbos. Okay, that we have the wine, the Kiddush, the Zman. We said that was the Shehachianu blessing. Okay, then the candle, right, the blessing for and Havdalah. Barava Amar Yak Nahaz, Yayin Kiddush Ner Havdalah Zman. That should be the order. Okay? With the Shechianu coming at the end. Okay? The Hilchata Kirava. And the law, says the Gemara, is like Rava. And as Zev pointed out, okay, the other day, that's clearly been the practice.
Right.
Now, what's interesting, however, is that one would have thought that perhaps this whole inyan would end here, and we would come back to discussions from our Mishnah. That's not what happens. Instead, however, since we were talking about the end of Shabbat and the beginning of Yom Tov, we're still going to deal with some issues pertaining to Havdalah. Because remember, we said earlier that we seem to be using one cup, that the machloket between Rava and Abaye, even though, again, we come back to that there was different order. They all agree that all of these blessings are said only on a single cup of wine, which was something we raised earlier. How could you have multiple blessings that are different on the same cup of wine? We're going to get to a situation also, okay, where maybe we might even ask, what happens if you have the same blessing to be recited on the same item? Do you have to repeat it or not? And we're going to come to that shortly. However, continuing back again on this discussion of Havdalah, Rav Huna bar Yehuda, Ikle lebe Rava. Rav Huna bar Yehuda came to the house of Rava, Aitu l'kamayhu ma'or ubsami. So when he came, it must have been Motzei Shabbos, so to speak, and they brought him a light and spices. Okay. Now, if we go back momentarily to the machloket that we just read between Abaye and Rava, notice both of them do begin with the same item, yayin. Then they continue with the same item, kiddush. Okay? So those two items, okay, seem to follow, right? The question is, what about what came afterwards? So here, our tree comes to say they brought him light and what did he do? Berech Rava Absamim, that Rava first said the blessing on the spices, okay, and then said the blessing on the light, Amarle, and they said to him, Ha ben Beit Shammai or ben Beit Hillel, view of Beit Shammai or the view of Beit Hillel, Mo'or V'hadar Absamim, that the light should come first and then go back and do the blessing on the spices. Umaihi, and then what is the situation? Ditznan, because we've been taught in a Mishnah, Beit Shammai Omrim Ner Umazon Besamim Bahavdalah, namely if you've come, let's say, in the middle of Shalosh Shudas, right? That the blessing order should be the candle, Birkat Hamazon, the spices, and then Havdalah. Ubeit Hillel Omrim, according to Beit Hillel, Ner Ubesamim Umazon Vahavdalah, that the candle, then the spices, then the Birkat Hamazon, then the Havdalah. So notice in that case, both Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel agree Ner is first, Havdalah is fourth. Where do they differ? Right? In the middle. So, Ani Rava Batre Va'ama. So Rava then answers after their comment, and he says, Zo divrei Rabbi Meir. Okay, what you were citing was the view of Rabbi Meir. Aval Rabbi Yehuda Omer. But the view of Rabbi Yehuda, his explanation was that Lo nechlechu Beit Shammai u Beit Hillel al hamazon shehu betchila, the al hahavdalah shehi basof. According to Rabbi Yehuda, the argument of Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel is not based on when to do the Birkat Hamazon. That should be done first. Or to be done, do Havdalah, that should be done at the end. Alma nechleku, on what did they argue? Al hama'or va'al habsamim. What order then comes the light, and what order then comes the spices? Beit Shammai omrim ma'or va'achar kach b'samim. According to Beit Shammai, we say the blessing on the candle, okay, the light, and then the spices. Ubeit Hillel omrim b'samim ve'achar kach ma'or. And Beit Hillel says we need to do it first on the spices and afterwards on the light.
Right.
Now, what happens? Right? What's the practice?
Yeah.
Rabbi Yochanan is going to tell us. V'amar Rabbi Yochanan. He says, Nahagu ha'am kebeit Hillel.
Right.
He's telling us that the common practice, notice he doesn't say the halacha, but the common practice of the people was according to the practice of Beit Hillel, va'aliba de Rabbi Yehuda, and according to the interpretation given by Rabbi Yehuda. Okay? So that's what we would see. Now notice that's a different way of defining what the end result, what the practice is going to be. All right? Now, it's not out of the ordinary, but the Gemara is aware that there is this concept of seeing what the people do. Okay? Now, we have another story coming up, and this story also is going to try to give us, some insight on the practice. Rav Yaakov bar Abba, Ikle lebe Rava. Rav Yaakov bar Abba arrived to the house of Rava. Chazia de Borech Borei Pri Hagafen Akasa Kama. And what did he see? He saw here that Rava first made a blessing, over the wine on the one cup. Vahada Borech Akasa de Birchata. And afterwards, he did a blessing on a cup for Birkat Hamazon. Okay, so we're seeing here that he used 2 cups of wine. One for the, if we want to say for the Kiddush, or the, right? One for the Birkat Hamazon, V'ishte, and then he drank. So did he use 2 cups, 2 separate cups, or did he use 1 cup? Or did he, if he used 1 cup, did he say 2 separate blessings? Now we go on. Amarle, so they said to him, Lama lach kuli hai, why did you do all of this? Ha berach lan mar chadazimna. Here the master could have blessed, in other words, 1 time. Couldn't you have been able to use the same cup and 1 blessing, both for Kiddush at the beginning, let's say, and Birkat Hamazon at the end? Amarle, he responded, Ki havinen be Reish Galuta, when it was that we were in the house of the Reish Galuta, remember the head of the Babylonian Jewish Academy, the community, Hachi Avdinen, this is what we did. Amarle, and they said to him, Tenach be Reish Galuta, put aside the example of the house of the Reish Galuta. That may not be the best example of a precedent. Why? Dahachi Avid, because even though that's what he did, the Safek Maitelan, Safek Lo Maitelan, because there was a question whether they would bring us more wine, or a question if they did not bring us more wine. Hacha ha manach kasakaman. Here you have a cup, so to speak, sitting right in front of us. Vida'atan eluye. And our intent is clearly on doing all these blessings on this particular cup. Amarle, he responded to them, Ana avde katami de derav. He said, I acted like the students of Rav. the Rav Barona, the Rav Hananel. Like Rav Barona and Rav Hananel, Talmidei de Rav, the students of Rav, Havu Yadve Besu'udata, who were sitting at a meal. Right? And what happened? Kai Eluhu Rav Yivasaba. And standing on them, in other words, acting as their waiter, was Rav Yiva the elder. Amrule. And they said to him, Havlan v'nivarech, give us a cup of wine and we'll bless Birkat HaMazon. L'sof, Amrule, Havlan v'nishte. Afterwards, they said to him, bring us some wine and we'll drink. Amar lahu, he said to them, Hachi Amar Rav. This is what was the practice, and said Rav, according to Rav, Kevan da Amritu, Havlan v'nivrech, since you indicated that you wanted to bring a cup of wine and do Pirkat HaMazon, implying that their intent was the end of the meal, right? Itzara l'chu l'mishte. It's forbidden for you to drink any further. Ma'itama, what's the reasoning? Da'aschitu da'ataichu, namely because you diverted your attention, okay, from continuing the meal to focus on saying Birkat HaMazon to conclude the meal. So this issue of diverting one's attention is going to come back to it in just a moment after we bring the next story, okay? Because the next, so does that tell us, so that was the practice of the students of Rav. That when Rav said if they diverted their attention, they needed to do a new blessing and couldn't use the same cup. Now, another story, although that issue didn't prove our point, let's see if the next story does. Amemar Umar Zutra V'Rav Ashi. So we have three Chachamim seated together. Havu Yatve B'Su'uda. They were sitting at a meal together. V'kai Elihu Rav Acha B'Rei de Rava. And there walked in to join them another colleague, Rav Acha B'Rei de Rava. Okay? Now, in this case, he didn't really walk in. He was, again, the person who was acting as the waiter to serve them. Serve them wine. What did he see? First of all, Amemar Barech al kol kasa v'kasa. Amemar made a new blessing on each individual cup of wine. The second participant, Mar Zutra, Barech akasa kama v'akasa batra. He made one blessing on the first cup and another blessing on the last cup. So he did different from a member. Third participant, Rav Ashi, Barech Akasa Kama, V'tulo Berech. He only blessed on the first cup, and he didn't say the blessing of wine, Berech Pregafen, on the other cups. So we have three different practices, right? Only one of which, right, seemed to follow the idea of what was the statement of Rav. Okay? Amar laho, Rav Acha bar Abba. He said to them, Anan kiman na'avid. We, according to whom should we do? Should we follow? Amemar Amar, says Amemar, explaining his view, Nimlach Ana, I changed my mind. In other words, it was a nice Shabbos meal. I continued to drink, and so therefore I wasn't finished. I have a responsibility to bless each cup separately. Okay. Now, Mar Zutra Amar, Ana da Avde Ketalmidei de Rav. He explained, I followed the practice of the students of Rav. I set it on the first cup, continued to drink, but when I knew I was going to finish, I therefore set it on the last cup. V'Rav Ashi Amar, his response, Lit hilchata ketalmidei de Rav. The law is not like the students of Rav. Daha Yom Tov shechal liot achar Shabbat, because here, when we have a holiday, okay, that follows after Shabbat, V'amar Rav, and Rav himself said, Yayin, Kiddush, Ner Havdalah, okay, that one should follow the practice of wine, then the Kiddush, then the light, and then the Havdalah. Velohi, but that's not the case, he says. Hatam, there in that example, akar da'ate mimishtia. Okay, he uprooted his intention from drinking. Okay, in other words, he stopped drinking as part of the meal. Hacha, here in our case, namely when we talk about Kiddush and Havdalah, okay, lo akar da'ate mimishtia. He did not do, right? He had changed his mind. Excuse me, from Kiddush and Havdalah. Okay, he did not lose his intent. Now, I want to point out just an interesting quick parallel to, the Pesach Seder. How many cups of wine do we drink? 4 cups, right? And we say a blessing on each of the cups. Okay? So that would seem to follow, okay, a different order, right? The first cup we do is Kiddush, which is fine. Second cup we drink really is part of the meal. The third cup we drink is for Birkat Hamazon. Fourth cup then is to bring the finishing of the meal. Okay, so there
But we say when we keep reciting the Haggadah in between, isn't that a hefsek?
That's the question. Good question, Zeb. Okay, it could be that perhaps because we continue to recite the Haggadah, okay, that therefore that would fall into the category of ischitu da'ataychu, that our intent is not on the drinking, but we've changed our focus. At times we're asking questions. At times we're having a meal. At times we're singing Hallel. At times we're singing other songs. Okay? So it may fall into that category, and that is why we need to say a bracha on each and every cup. Okay? Now, what happens? At this point, the Gemara comes back to the whole issue of Havdalah again. Because remember, we saw that Rav Yaakov bar Abba went to visit Rabbah, and the question of what was the order of Havdalah. So the Gemara comes back. Ki mate la'avdule. When it comes to making Havdalah, okay, what did he see Rav Yaakov bar Abba in the house of Rava? He saw the following. Kam shemaye va'adlik avuka mishraga. He saw the servant get up and he lit a torch from the lamp. Okay. Now our assumption is you've got the lamp that they were using for light, but he used that to light a torch that had multiple wicks. Amarle, so he asks Rava, Lama lach kuli hai. Why do you go through all of this? Ha mincha shraga. Here you've got a lamp right here in front of you. Amarle, and he responded, Shama mida'ate denafshe ka'avid. That the servant, excuse me, servant was acting on his own. However, Rav Yaakov responds, Amarle, ilo shamia le mine demar, if he had not heard it from the words of the master, lo hava avid, he wouldn't have done it. So what happens? Amarle, he said to them, Lo savar lemar avuka lahavdala mitzvah min hamuvchar. Doesn't the master consider the fact of using a torch, okay, for the purpose of havdalah, okay, is a more choice means of observing the mitzvah, implying, that again, that's part of the reason that we use something with multiple wicks. Okay. Now, patach va'amar. So we're continuing now with our discussion of Havdalah, and in particular, what does one say? How many distinctions does one make when they recite Havdalah? Okay. We have the following. What did he say? Hamavdil ben kodesh lecho, ben or lechoshech, ben Yisrael la'amim. So far, right? Separating between holy and weekday, between light and dark, between the Jewish people and the nations. Ben Yom HaShvi'i l'Sheshet Yemei HaMa'aseh, between the seventh day and the 6 days of creation. Amarle. So he said to them again, Lamalach koli hai. Why did you have to say all of these? V'hamar Rav Yehuda amar Rav. And Rav Yehuda, in the name of Rav, says, Hamavdil ben kodesh lechol. Okay? That according to Rav, if one simply says, separating the holy from the weekday, from the common, Zohi Havdalato Shel Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. That was the Havdalah that seemed to have been sufficient for Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. All he did was one distinction. Amarle. And he responded, Ana kehasavirali. He said, here are of the following opinion. The Amar Rabbi Oshia, that Rabbi Oshia says, or actually Rabbi Eliezer Amar, Rabbi Oshia, in the name of Rabbi Oshia. Hapochet, one who sort of speaks, says the minimum, lo yifchot mishlosha, should not set anything less than a minimum of 3 separations, 3 distinctions. Vahamosif, and the one who does it in detail, increases, lo yosif al sheva, should not add more than 7 separations, 7 distinctions. Amarle, and he said to him as we go over a little bit on Kaf Dalet, right? Vahamar lo tlata amar v'lo sheva amar. But here the master, he didn't say 3, he didn't say 7. So the Mefarshim argue, well, 4 is between 3 and 7. So why is the Gemara even asking this question? Are you saying it has to be only 3? And if you don't do 3, then you've got to do 7? Okay. So what happens? Amale Ivra. This is by truth, he says. The phrase, Ben Yom HaShvi'i l'Sheshet Yemei HaMa'aseh, that part of the Havdalah, between the 7th day and the 6 days of creation, Me'ein Chatimahi. It is a kind of closing for the blessing. Va'amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. And Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, Hamavdil, one when he recites the Havdalah blessing, Tzrich Sheyomar Me'ein Chatima Samuch Lechatimato, has to say a kind of closing close to the very end, the closing of the blessing. Upampadita'i Amre, and the sages of Pampadita say, Me'ein Patichatan Samuch Lechatimatan, that they need to say a kind of opening, beginning, between close to the closing. Mai Benaihu, what's the difference between them? That we'll see tomorrow. Okay? As we'll continue with the discussion of what is to be included in the Havdalah blessing and what's considered an approximate closing or an approximate beginning. Okay? And that's where we'll pick up.
Right.
Okay? So everybody stay well and have a good
Shek,
day.
thank you very much. Thank you. Have a great day.
Okay?
Good day, everybody.
Have a good day.